was in my early 20s, my boyfriend, Bart, and I got a flat tire while driving on a freeway near downtown Atlanta. I immediately panicked. This was long before everyone had cell phones. I worried we would be stranded for hours. I worried that I'd either have to walk alone and get help or stay alone with the car. I worried that our whole day would be ruined by this car trouble. As Bart pulled to the side of the road, I shared my many concerns. He looked questioningly at me and said, "I'm just going to change the tire. It will take a couple of minutes." What for me was a major problem, Bart saw as a minor inconvenience. He changed the tire and we were on our way in about 15 minutes. This story illustrates a fundamental point about stress. Different people can respond to the same event in really different ways. This means that the same event can lead to different physical and psychological effects on different people. This is why some people seem to thrive on stress and others become debilitated. But most importantly, it illustrates that helping people respond to stressful events in a more positive way can lead to better physical and psychological well-being. Let's start by examining what causes stress. One of the major sources of stress is our relationships. Conflict with family members, friends, and spouses all cause stress, including more serious family issues, such as concern about money, a loved one with a major illness, or divorce. And it's not just the bad events. Good events also cause stress. Why? Change is stressful, and even welcome changes. Getting married, having a baby, getting a new job, retiring, moving to a new house, all disrupt our existing lives in many ways. For most people, work involves stress. Most jobs involve meeting deadlines, making difficult decisions, spending time with colleagues who may not be your favorite people. Work stress is particularly intense for those with jobs that involve a responsibility for saving people's lives. Doctors, firefighters, air traffic controllers. In these jobs, making a mistake can literally have life or death consequences. This is one reason why burnout is particularly common in people who work in helping professions, such as doctors, nurses, police officers, and social workers. Beyond our immediate personal and professional environment, factors within the broader environment also contribute to stress. This can include long-term stressors, such as living in a community with high levels of crime, noise, or pollution. But it can also include shorter-term cataclysmic events that can be particularly stressful, such as natural disasters, terrorist attacks, and mass shootings. And you don't have to experience these events personally to feel stress. Researchers in one study measured the level of stress in Americans across the country in the weeks following the 2013 Boston Marathon bombings. People who watched 6 or more hours a day of media coverage of the bombings were 9 times more likely to report experiencing high stress than those who watched fewer than 1 hour a day. Moreover, while it's possible to describe different sources of stress, relationships, work, environment, and so on, as distinct from one another, in reality, different types of stresses can be interrelated. Regardless of the specific factors causing stress, stress can be directly damaging to your health. People who are under stress have a greater risk of developing many different illnesses and diseases, including ulcers, diabetes, arthritis, gastrointestinal disorders, asthma, headaches, hives, back pain, and cardiovascular diseases. In some cases, experiencing stress may lead to potentially fatal consequences. For example, stress-induced cardiomyopathy refers to a medical condition first observed in the early 1990s in which a person appears to be having a heart attack. This condition, informally known as broken heart syndrome, is brought about by a surge of stress hormones, leading to chest pain and trouble breathing. But these symptoms are triggered by an intense physical or emotional event, such as divorce, the death of a spouse, major financial trouble, or a serious medical diagnosis. And in some cases, broken heart syndrome can be fatal. A 2014 study published in the Journal of the American Medical Association found that people aged 60 and over who experienced the death of a spouse were 2 times more likely to experience a heart attack or stroke in the month following this loss than married people who did not experience this loss. How exactly does stress lead to such negative health consequences? Think about the last time you felt stressed. Heart racing, stomach queasy, muscles tensed. What caused that feeling of stress? Often it is something relatively, in the scheme of things, minor. Maybe you had to give an important presentation at work or felt overwhelmed getting prepared to host a dinner party. But here's the problem. Our body's natural physiological stress response is designed to help us respond to extreme, life-threatening situations. Say when you are chased by a large barking dog or when you are in combat during war. But we also showed this same physiological stress reaction even in situations that are not actually life-threatening in any way. As Stanford neuroscientist Robert Sapolsky writes in his book, Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers, stress-related disease emerges predominantly out of the fact that we so often activate a physiological system that has evolved for responding to acute physical emergencies. But we turn it on for months on end, worrying about mortgages, relationships, and promotions. In contrast, zebras only show a heightened physiological reaction, heart beating fast, rapid breathing, muscles tensing, when responding to actual life and death emergencies, such as being chased by a lion. Imagine that you are walking in a forest with friends on a Sunday afternoon. As you are talking to them, not really paying attention to where you are walking, you suddenly notice movement just in front of your right foot. You quickly glance down and see a large striped snake, coiled and seemingly ready to strike. What's your immediate physiological reaction? Like most people who are afraid of snakes, your heart will start to pound, your muscles will become tense, and you will start to sweat. Some people may experience mild forms of these reactions just from hearing this description of the snake. This type of fight or flight reaction in response to threat was first described by Walter Cannon, a physiologist at Harvard Medical School in the early 1900s. As I described in the last lesson, when we first notice any kind of threat, such as the snake, our sympathetic nervous system and our endocrine system are stimulated, leading to increases in 2 hormones, adrenaline, or the more technical name of epinephrine, and norepinephrine, also called noradrenaline. Cannon demonstrated that increases in these hormones in the bloodstream activate the cardiovascular system, so that blood is directed to the brain and muscles. This is what prepares someone to either fight off a threat or run away. This original fight or flight model was extended in 1936 by Hungarian endocrinologist Hans Selye to describe not just our immediate response to a threat, but the stages the body goes through over time. This model, known as the General Adaptation Syndrome, describes 3 stages of what Selye was the first to call stress. Given how much we all use the word stress, it's interesting to note that Selye himself later said that if his English had been better, he would have used the word strain. That's partly because in physics, the term stress refers only to the force applied, like saying, I'm under a lot of stress, whereas strain in physics refers to what happens in the response to the stress. And it's a good point. In psychology, we are interested not only in the stressors, another word Selye created, but also in the stress response. However, unlike in physics, where strain typically refers to an impairment from which there is no recovery, in psychology, we study the response to stressors because recovery is an option. The first stage in the stress response is basically fight or flight, also known as the alarm stage. In this stage, the body is mobilizing all of its resources to do whatever is necessary to fight off or escape from the immediate threat. During this phase, both epinephrine and norepinephrine are released into the bloodstream, triggering increases in heart rate, blood pressure, and breathing rate. If the stressor lasts more than a very short time, a second system, often called the HPA axis, releases an additional hormone called cortisol. Cortisol releases extra glucose into the bloodstream for immediate energy. But it's also involved in stopping or slowing down processes that do not help fight off an immediate threat, such as digestion, reproduction, and even the immune system. After all, although illness and disease may also kill you, those threats act slowly. If you don't survive the attack from the lion, it doesn't really matter if your immune system is strong enough to protect you from the flu. Next is the resistant stage. During this stage, the body releases less of the alarm stage hormones in response to the threat. Heart rate, blood pressure, and breathing are all still elevated to help deliver oxygen and energy quickly throughout the body, but they are subsiding. Non-essential functions such as digestion, growth, and reproduction may resume, at least partially, which can help the body return to its regular level of functioning, but at a slower pace than normal. This is the stress response to more typical daily life stressors, like interviewing for a new job, having a conflict with a friend, or getting stuck in traffic. However, in other cases, the stressors and the stress response are not short-lived, but rather can continue over long periods of time. This could include the stress of living in poverty, or constant interpersonal conflict, or intense work pressure. When the threat, real or perceived, continues for a long time, the exhaustion stage sets in. This is the stage that occurs when the body's state of arousal, meaning a state of physiological and/or psychological activation, persists for a long time. In the exhaustion stage, maintenance operations have been delayed so long in response to stress that the body experiences extra wear and tear on multiple systems, including cardiovascular, neuroendocrine, and immune. Prolonged stress can also lead to nutritional imbalances, such as low magnesium, which reduces the body's ability to produce and use energy. And as the body's resources are depleted, this further increases the risk of developing an infection or disease that the body would otherwise typically be able to fight off. This explains why people who are under ongoing stress are more likely to develop cardiovascular disease, high blood pressure, arthritis, colds, and flu. To study how psychological factors influence people's susceptibility to illness, researchers at Carnegie Mellon University conducted a series of studies starting in 1986, in which study volunteers agreed to be exposed to the common cold virus, which was inserted into their nostrils. Researchers then examined these people every day for 4 weeks. They asked people whether they are experiencing any symptoms of the cold: runny nose, sore throat, coughing. The researchers take saliva samples to measure antibodies to the cold in their bodies. And they've even gathered and weighed the tissues used by the people during the cold. Thank you, scientists. Across all of these measures, the researchers find consistent results. People who are under more stress at the start of the study are more likely to develop a cold. They don't have the ability to fight off the initial infection, whereas people who are not under stress can fight off that same infection. But stress also has indirect effects on health. Think about the last time you've experienced a lot of stress and how it changed your regular behavior. During times of stress, most people stop engaging in behaviors that actually promote health, such as exercising. They may also start engaging in behaviors that hurt health, eating more high-fat and sugar foods, drinking alcohol, getting less sleep, and so on. These behaviors, in turn, weaken our body's immune system and increase our likelihood of getting sick. More recent findings have led to important updates to our model of stress. For example, Canon's original fight-or-flight model was updated to include the possibility of a freeze response in the face of threat, becoming immobile. In addition, Shelley Taylor, a health psychologist at UCLA, published a groundbreaking paper in 2000 that shed light on another approach to managing stress: connect with others. This model, Tend and Befriend, was based on a review of rodent, primate, and human studies showing that evolution led to gender differences in stress response. Her review noted that fleeing from a stress would be less viable for a woman who is nursing or taking care of an infant. Taylor also noted empirical research showing that during times of stress, women prefer to connect with other women, whereas men prefer to be alone. Biologically, stress triggers a release of oxytocin, the hormone associated with bonding or love. And women's higher estrogen levels are thought to enhance the release of this oxytocin. Male hormones, such as testosterone, do not seem to enhance the social bonding effects of oxytocin. In short, Selye's model of stress, together with later updates, introduced the reality that stress causes a wide-ranging response across various body systems, the cardiovascular system, immune system, and so on. This view was in direct contrast to prior stimulus response models that had all narrowly focused only on very specific responses of the body. His concept of stress made a huge contribution to the field of psychology. However, Selye's wide-ranging model of stress focused only on the physiological causes and effects of stress. It ignored the role of psychology. And as other researchers soon pointed out, psychological stressors and psychological stress responses are also important. And the scientific evidence is clear. Stress can lead to serious and lasting psychological effects, including fear, anger, anxiety, sadness, and intense loneliness. Following a trauma, such as an actual or threatened death, serious injury, or sexual assault, the psychological effects can be even more serious. Effects can include intrusive thoughts, difficulty sleeping, and feelings of numbness and dissociation. When these reactions occur immediately after the event, or at least within the first month, it is known as acute stress disorder. When the reactions linger longer than a month, or first emerge more than a month after the event, the disorder is known as post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. Although many people who experience an extreme event develop disruptive symptoms, these typically fade within days or weeks. But for people with PTSD, these symptoms continue for more than a single month and can become chronic, causing significant distress and difficulty functioning in daily life. They can include severe anxiety, feeling on edge, bursts of anger, and constantly reliving the event through memories, flashbacks, and nightmares. Over time, these symptoms can also lead to serious health problems. Those who live in close proximity to a traumatic event or lose friends or loved ones are especially vulnerable to PTSD. One study of people living in a town evacuated following the 2011 earthquake, tsunami, and nuclear power plant disaster in Japan found that more than half of the over 5,000 inhabitants showed some symptoms of PTSD. Another study surveyed Virginia Tech students following a school shooting in which 49 faculty members and students were shot and 32 killed, and found that about 15% of students continued to experience high levels of post-traumatic stress 3 to 4 months later, with PTSD especially likely for students who had someone close to them who was injured or killed. However, even among people who all experience the same traumatic event to the same degree, the risk of experiencing PTSD varies. As part of a study on childhood trauma, a research team had been conducting brain scans on adolescents living in the Boston area to assess how they responded to both negative and positive images. Then, 1 month following the April 2013 bombing at the Boston Marathon, researchers asked these same adolescents to complete online surveys assessing possible PTSD, with symptoms such as having difficulty concentrating and continuing to think about the bombing, even when trying not to. Findings revealed that adolescents whose brain scans prior to the bombing showed greater activation in the amygdala in response to negative images, such as people feeling sad, fighting, or threatening someone, were at greater risk of developing PTSD after the bombing. This idea that different people can experience and react to the same event in very different ways led to a new psychological theory, the transactional theory of stress and coping. This model, developed by Richard Lazarus in the 1960s, says that the meaning a particular event has for a person is a sort of personal transaction with the environment, not merely the same for everyone. In fact, this meaning is regarded as a more important predictor of the experience of stress than the actual event. According to the transactional model, the amount of stress people experience is based on their assessment of two factors: their assessment of the stressors, called primary appraisal, and their assessment of the resources they have to cope, called secondary appraisal. For primary appraisal, let's say you get fired from your job. Some people may appraise this as super stressful. I won't be able to pay my mortgage. Other people may appraise it less negatively or even somewhat positively. At least I don't have that commute anymore. Next, people engage in secondary appraisal, in which they examine their ability to cope with the event based on their resources. And what was surprising in this work was that, at least in some circumstances, emotion-focused coping, meaning managing your response to a stressor, could be as effective at reducing stress as actually fixing the problem creating the stress. This model was the first to describe how shifting your emotional reactions to an event in a positive direction can be an important part of managing stress. This brings me to what I think is the most important finding on the psychology of stress. Mindset matters. The term mindset describes any belief we have that influences how we see ourselves and the world, and therefore how we respond to different situations. Most of us think about stress as completely negative and something to be avoided at all costs. But seeing stress in a negative way actually increases anxiety and arousal, and can therefore create or increase precisely the negative consequences we fear. Here's a personal story. When my son Robert was in 4th or 5th grade and headed to school for the first day of standardized testing, I did my best to reduce his stress. Robert's always been a pretty quiet kid, a total introvert. And I said that I knew it was going to be a really hard day and that he should just make sure to stay calm. News stories often report the increasing pressure children feel when taking high-stakes standardized tests, and many teachers and parents complain about these tests. You can imagine my surprise when he looked up to me, smiled, and said, "Standardized testing day is my favorite day all year." When I asked him why, he reported it was because this was the one day the school is really quiet. You don't have to read aloud or work with a partner, and everyone just sits and fills in the bubbles. What's not to like? So for Robert, an introvert, the testing provides a very welcome break from the loud chaos of school. This example illustrates a really important principle confirmed by research in psychology. Different people can see and react to the same thing in different ways. And yet, we all have the opportunity to view stress as a non-threatening, normal part of daily life. We could see stress as exhilarating and invigorating, as giving the body extra energy to respond effectively to various daily life challenges. Here's a simple example. Researchers showed employees at a large financial institution one of two videos. One video gave the typical message that stress is debilitating and leads to poor work performance and negative health outcomes. The other video gave a stress is enhancing message. It described the benefits of stress for improving creativity, productivity, and the immune system. As the researchers predicted, people who watched the stress is enhancing video showed substantial benefits. They reported better work performance, as well as lower levels of anxiety and depression. Stress is unavoidable. We all experience various minor and major challenges. Dealing with irritating coworkers, coping with a lingering health issue, feeling overwhelmed by an endless to-do list, and so on. We can't eliminate all stress from our lives, but we can choose to respond to stressful situations in a new way. by changing our thoughts and behaviors in ways that reduce its detrimental effects on happiness and health. But it's important to keep in mind that all stressors are not the same, and therefore reducing stress isn't one size fits all. Instead, different strategies are most effective for managing different stressors. So people who learn a variety of different types of strategies are better equipped to manage the different stressors that come their way. The worldwide coronavirus pandemic of 2020 led to an interrelated set of multiple acute and chronic stressors. This pandemic in and of itself was a cataclysmic event. Growing numbers of people became ill, and growing numbers of people experienced the death of family members and friends. Interpersonal stress increased at home as schools closed and many people lost their jobs, which also led to serious financial stress, while others shifted to home-based work. Meanwhile, those not working from home suddenly encountered more hazardous conditions. Other stressors included the experiences of confinement, of isolation, and anxieties about protocols. Even consumption of pandemic-related news and news about reactions to pandemic news may have become an additional stressor. And yet, many people also developed and relied on various strategies for reducing stress. Here are a few I want to pass along, as they are the ones most supported by empirical research. Relax. Stress leads to bad health outcomes precisely because it creates physiological arousal and increases levels of cortisol, which exert additional wear and tear on the body and suppresses the immune system. But you can counteract the body's natural response to challenges by using relaxation techniques like deep breathing, progressive muscle relaxation, and meditation to reduce arousal and thereby reduce the negative effects of stress on the body. Change your stress mindset. Perception always influences our stress response. That's why many of the things we think of as stressful, too many emails in your inbox, being stuck in a long line at the post office, having a job interview, are really that way only because you interpret them in that way. Instead, try to be more like the zebra. Save your real stress response for things that are literally life or death and not the relatively small hassles of daily life. Find a friend. People with more social support are better able to cope with the minor and major stresses of daily life, sometimes thanks to practical help, but also simply having a listening ear. People with greater social support experience better health outcomes across virtually all domains, from better psychological well-being to faster recovery from illness to a longer life expectancy. Look for any silver lining. Unlike the zebra, it is possible for us to think about moderate levels of acute stress in a new, more positive way, as energizing and inspiring, not just exhausting and debilitating. And anybody can, with practice, get better at looking on the bright side of life. How? It's amazing what a difference it can make to focus on something, anything, that's relatively good about the situation instead of what's bad. This process of reframing stressful situations to find something positive does not happen automatically, at least not initially for those who aren't naturally optimistic. But making a deliberate effort to find something good can help you get better at reframing and in turn, reduce the negative effects of stress on the body. And if possible, try to find some people around you who tend to see things in a more optimistic light and try to model their reaction. People who reframe their acute stress response can reduce their chronic stress levels and show better psychological and physical well-being. And this effect can be contagious in a good way. I started this lecture by describing my own panicked reaction to my boyfriend's flat tire and his calm response. Even so many years later, I remember noting his response and deciding right then and there that I should marry that guy. And he's now my husband. This topic of stress is an essential one in psychology because it illustrates so many different aspects of the field, the intersection of our biology, cognitions, and emotions. So stress will help us understand the rest of the field of psychology. Stress also illustrates a more general principle that how we experience the world is more than a function of what happens to us. Rather, as you'll see in the next few lessons, how we interpret our experiences also affects sensation, perception, and pain.